Okay, the end of John chapter 12. This is basically a summary of Jesus' public ministry and an overview of how the Jews, in particular his own people, rejected him. Even after Jesus had, these should not necessarily be taken as an event that occurred at the very end of Jesus. This is more like an overall statement of Jesus' ministry and the response to it. Even after Jesus had done all these miraculous signs in their presence. Now, in the Gospel of John, he has recorded 7 of these signs. We kind of stopped keeping track of them along the way, but let's go back and review. We had the changing of the water into wine in Cana in chapter 2. Then we had the healing of the official's son, also in Cana in chapter 4. Then we had the healing of the paralyzed man at the pool in chapter 5. Then we had the feeding of the 5,000 in chapter 6, which is also recorded in the other Gospels. Then we had the walking on the water, which is an immediate follow-up to the feeding of the 5,000, also in chapter 6. Let's see here. And then what's number 6? The healing of the man born blind in chapter 9. That was a big deal. And then the raising of the dead of Lazarus in chapter 11. Those were the 7 signs. Now, the 8 resurrection, of course, will be a sign as well. That'll be the 8. But the ones that have been recorded so far as part of Jesus' public ministry to prove himself to the people, those are the 7 that John included as part of his account of Jesus' ministry. Now, there were others. John will mention that he did others. At the end of this gospel, the writer, John, will mention that Jesus did many others, and some of those others are written in the other gospels. John included these 7 for that purpose. So even after John had done all these miraculous signs in their presence, they still would not believe in him. This was to fulfill the word of Isaiah the prophet. Lord, who has believed our message? And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? That's down there in Isaiah 53, verse 1. Now that is part of the suffering servant passages. It might be worthwhile to take a look at that, because Isaiah 53 is one of those sections of Isaiah that speak of the upcoming servant, which we now call the suffering servant, which we identify as Jesus. It actually begins, this is one of those instances where the numbers, the chapters and verses aren't really numbered correctly, but remember the chapters and verses weren't part of the original text. It actually begins in chapter 52 of Isaiah, starting in verse 13. See, my servant, this is God the Father speaking, my servant will act wisely. He will be raised and lifted up and highly exalted, just as there were many who were appalled at him. His appearance was so disfigured beyond that of any man, and his form marred beyond human likeness. So he will sprinkle many nations, and kings will shut their mouths because of him. For what they were not told, they will see, and what they have not heard, they will understand. Who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He grew up before him like a tender shoot, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and familiar with suffering. Like one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. That's what John is pointing to here in his gospel. As he picks that verse, that passage, he's bringing to mind the entire section of Isaiah which talks about this, the rejected servant. Surely he took up our infirmities and carried our sorrows, yet we considered him stricken by God, smitten by him, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. John himself will mention the piercing at the end of his gospel. He's the only gospel writer who does. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all like sheep have gone astray. There's that shepherd motif again. Each of us has turned to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. We've already read that in the other Gospels, and we'll read it again in John. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before her shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. There's that lamb imagery again, which John has been big on. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. And who could speak of his descendants? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgression of my people he was stricken. He was assigned a grave with the wicked, and with the rich in his death, which we see that recorded in all three Gospels, all four Gospels. All three Gospels so far, and John will mention it as well. Though he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. Yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer. And though the Lord makes his life a guilt offering, he will see his offspring and prolong his days. So he's going to see the benefits going to come after this is over. And the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand. After the suffering of his soul, he will see the light of life and be satisfied. So there's good things to come out of this, even as terrible as it's going to be. By his knowledge, my righteous servant will justify many, and he will bear their iniquities. Therefore I will give him a portion among the great, and he will divide the spoils of the strong, because he poured out his life unto death, and was numbered with the transgressors. We're going to read this theme expanded upon a lot in the epistles. For he bore the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressors. So by selecting that one part of that longer passage, by the way, here's my cat again, causing trouble as always, John, the writer of this gospel, is bringing to mind the entire passage. Sounds like a very good fit for Jesus Christ. That's what he wants us to see. For this reason they could not believe, because, as Isaiah says elsewhere, he has blinded their hearts, their eyes, and deadened their hearts, so they can neither see with their eyes, nor understand with their hearts, nor turn, and I would heal them. That goes all the way back to Isaiah's call, which is recorded in Isaiah chapter 6, where he sees this vision from God in the temple, hears God call out for someone to go for him, and he says, I will go. Here am I, send me. And he gives them his message to go and preach to people who will not believe him, who will not accept him, who will not hear him, and to keep preaching until all the cities are gone, until the land is ruined by invaders, literally by invaders that will come to conquer them. Because they're so set in their ways, they're heading straight to destruction. And eventually a remnant will return. That's the way Isaiah is structured. That's the end of the vision in Isaiah 6. And the way Isaiah is structured, that eventually a remnant will return, but the people that you're going to go speak to are not going to listen. Isaiah said this because he saw Jesus' glory and spoke about him. He didn't know that. Okay, Jesus himself says in the other Gospels that the prophets of the past longed to see these things. They longed to see and hear the things the apostles got to see and hear, but they didn't get to see and hear them. And again, the epistles, the New Testament writers after the Gospel period, during the church, will say that the holy men of the past spoke as moved by the prophets, but they didn't understand what they were speaking about. Okay, they were saying things that went well beyond their day, well beyond their time, and they didn't really know the full scope of what they were saying. And we read about that when we read the apostles, the prophets. Many of the things they said did have immediate fulfillment in their day, for them and for their kings they were speaking to, and for the audience of their day. But also a lot of what they said carried implications far beyond their time that they did not see and did not understand, even though they wanted to. They longed to get a chance to see those things, but they didn't. So Isaiah spoke about Jesus, longing to know what he was speaking about, but he didn't get a chance to see. Now he will see himself. Isaiah is part of the kingdom. He is and will be part of the kingdom. So Isaiah didn't miss out simply because he was born too early. But he didn't get to see these things happen in time in his day. Yet at the same time, so that's an overall statement of the Jews' rejection of Jesus, which goes back to what John was saying at the very beginning of his gospel in the prologue. He was in the world, John 1 verse 10. Jesus was in the world, and the world was made through him. The world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, the Israelites, the Jews, but his own did not receive him. That's basically a summary. John is now recapping Jesus' public ministry and saying this is how that happened. But he also goes on to say, yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, so not through simply being ethnic Jews, nor of human decision or a husband's will, like through some act of the father or act of procreation, but born of God. So yet at the same, so back to John now, verse 42, 12 verse 42. Yet at the same time, many, even among the leaders, did believe in him. But because of the Pharisees, they could not confess their faith. They would not confess their faith, for fear they would be put out of the synagogue. And again, as we said, we read about this back in the chapter 9, the story of the man born blind, and how he apparently was thrown out of the synagogue, and his parents were threatened with being thrown out of the synagogue. This was a serious penalty. Now, it wasn't in itself a death penalty, per se. But this was a serious penalty. It was basically being excommunicated from the community. And in later days, such as maybe in John's day, it could have carried with it essentially a death penalty, because if Judaism was accepted as a legal religion within Rome, and practicing Jews, did not have to follow through with the other Roman state religions, such as emperor worship or worship of the Roman gods. And if you weren't a Jew, then you were expected to participate in these acts of emperor worship and worship of other gods, which if you were a Christian, you couldn't do. And so if you did not do those things, then you would have potentially been open to skepticism and suspicion from your neighbors, which, largely depending on just kind of the disposition of the area leaders in charge of your area, could have caused you serious problems. It may have resulted in death, maybe not. Probably in most cases it didn't, but it may have. It may have carried that threat. So being cast out of the synagogue, at the very least, would have been a loss of financial and community support, and potentially more than that. And that was probably going on, and we know it was going on later on, and I mean, they even mention it here in John, the Pharisees already kind of doing that. And that became a problem for Jewish Christians. The whole book of Hebrews is kind of written to an audience of people who are being tempted to go back to Judaism, probably because of that pressure. And I'll talk about that when we get to Hebrews. But for they loved praise from men more than praise from God. Then Jesus cried out, and again, I don't know if he's saying this as he's leaving the stage for the last time and going into hiding, basically, or if this is just an overall statement of his message that John is including here at the end. Who knows? When a man believes, so this is basically Jesus' whether or not this literally happened, we can view this as Jesus' last message to the unbelieving world who heard him but rejected him. When a man believes in me, he does not believe in me only, but in the one who sent me. And Jesus has made that point many times over during his ministry. When he looks at me, he sees the one who sent me. I have come into the world as a light, so that no one who believes in me should stay in darkness. As for the person who hears my words but does not keep them, that goes back to the Sermon on the Mount, when he gives this long discourse in Mark 5, 6, and 7, and ends it by saying, therefore who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And if you don't put them if you hear my words but don't put them into practice, you're like a foolish man who built his house in the sand, and the house did not stand when trouble came its way. This is John's way of kind of saying that. So if the person who hears my words but does not keep them, the guy who's like a house that's built on the sand, I do not judge him. For I did not come to judge the world but to save it. That goes back to John 3:16. During that discourse where he said that God saw the world, he sent his only begotten Son, so whoever believes in him should have eternal life through him, and God did not send the Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save it. However, those who don't believe in the Son will be condemned. That goes back again to the idea of the day of the Lord, being both the day of salvation and the day of judgment. So I don't judge him, for I did not come to judge the world, but to save it. There is a judge for the one who rejects me and does not accept my word. So that is going to happen. Just because Jesus' purpose was not to judge the world doesn't mean there is no judgment. And it doesn't mean that you can get away with rejecting him without being judged for. Like that, it is going to happen, okay? That his objective was to save, but the consequence of rejecting his saving efforts is to be judged. That's just going to happen. There is a judge for the one who rejects me and does not accept my words. The very word which I spoke will condemn him at the last day. Remember, Jesus himself is called the Word way back in John 1. So that word that Jesus spoke is going to be the judge, the standard by which we're all eventually measured against. We saw that in graphic form in the parable at the end of Matthew 25, when Jesus gives this explains this scene of almost like a courtroom scene in heaven with the judge on the throne, and those on the right and those on the left who are divided up into the sheep and the goats. And he says to the ones on his right, "You're going to come into me with my kingdom because you did all these things for me when you acted favorably towards people. And those who are on the left who are not going to be in the kingdom, you didn't do what I said you should do. You didn't conduct yourselves the way according to my words, with what I said. You didn't behave towards others and love others the way you should have, the way I wanted you to, the way I told you to, the way I spoke for you to, and that word is going to condemn you. For I did not speak of my own accord, but the Father who sent me commanded me what to say and how to say it." That's essentially what all the prophets did. All the prophecy is basically speaking for God. So in that regard, the entire Bible is a work of prophecy, because all prophecy, the function of all prophets is to speak the word of God. He is a prophet. He, in fact, is the prophet. And so he is saying the message that God put in his mouth to speak, like all the prophets did. I know that his command leads to eternal life. So whatever I say is just what the Father has told me to say. So that is it for Jesus' public ministry. By and large, the people rejected him. But for those who did receive him, he gave the right to become children of God. And that's essentially what we're going to be reading about for the next several chapters as we concentrate on Jesus, from chapter 13 to 17, as we concentrate on Jesus' relationship with his apostles, those who did accept him, and how he relates to them, and that's what we're going to be seeing. Now, and then we'll move on from there to the arrest and crucifixion in chapter 18, 19, and then the resurrection in 20, 21. And so, Jesus' public ministry has come to a close. He is done speaking to the people at large. He is not going to speak to them again. When he is brought out before them as part of the trial and arrest and trial, he's not going to speak. So his ministry to the people is basically done at this point. And now it's going to be with the apostles, and he's going to spend one last evening with them, preparing them for what's going to come. And then they, in turn, will eventually get empowered with the Spirit after Jesus leaves to go and speak that message to the people, which we'll read about in the rest of the New Testament. So we'll finish the Gospel of John sometime. I don't know when. I said at the beginning of the previous video, I don't know what's going to happen in the next few weeks. So I do not know when I want to get back to this again. I would have liked to have finished John altogether, but at least we got to the natural end point, break point here in the halfway mark. And as far as when we get back to it again, I don't know. I don't know when that's going to happen. Now, by anyone watching this video years in the future, because it's taking me so long to make these, it's not going to, even to me, when I go through this again someday down the road to prepare this video for uploading, it's not going to matter any longer. This will be a fixed event, a finished event that's over and done with. But right now, I'm going to be in kind of limbo for a while.